Something is coming, something that will have a major impact on the future of our nation. I'm talking about the 2020 presidential election. Now, you're probably thinking, didn't we just have an election? And you're right, the midterms were only a few weeks ago. However, in America, we like to draw things out. We like long campaign seasons with primaries and lots of campaigning. In fact, Barack Obama announced his campaign for president 2 full years before he was sworn in. Once the midterms are over, immediately we start to focus on the presidential election. That's why over the next few weeks, I'm going to be doing a deep dive into the 2020 election to talk about the candidates and the issues that matter to voters. Now, we can actually learn a lot from the midterm elections. We can learn about trends. We can see what kind of candidates resonated with voters. We can see what issues were most important. We can see a lot that will help us understand what may happen in 2020. Two states were very interesting to me because they showed a shifting dynamic in these states towards the Republican Party. The first state is Florida. Now, in Florida, the races were very close. Both the governor's race and the Senate race were less than a point away. However, despite this, the Republicans still did have very big successes in the state. They held on despite the growing unpopularity of President Trump among Latinos. They held on despite the fact that the Republican gubernatorial candidate was highly unliked, had made a lot of racially disparaging comments. They held on despite the fact that the man running for Senate as a Democrat had been an incumbent that was well known in the state. And that's something that I think shows the shifting dynamics in Florida and how that state is really trending more red, which is something very good for the Republicans and not good for the Democrats. There was a similar situation in Ohio where that state went overwhelmingly red. A lot of their congressional districts, their gubernatorial race, all went red. And this is something that is quite disturbing for a lot of Democrats because, this has always been one of the biggest swing states in the country. And there is a worry, among many people, and I've seen this, political commentators saying this, that, Ohio may be just now more of a solidly red state. And that's something that is quite worrying for a lot of Democrats who really see Ohio and see the voters there as people that they need to win back in order to be successful in the future. Despite this, however, the Democrats did have a very good night, especially in the Rust Belt. Despite their losses in Ohio, they did very well in states like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. They won lots of House seats, Senate seats, gubernatorial seats. They won on ballot measures, and this was really good because these were states that gave President Trump the election in 2016, and these were states that people really worried about, Democrats, about, are they going to, can they come back? Can they, resonate with voters again with a lot of these blue-collar populist voters, or was, that a group that they had really lost to sort of the Trump philosophy? And good news for them was that this election showed that that was not the case. So now that the midterms are over, people are looking at both the issues and the candidates who were very successful to see sort of what can be done and which candidates would be the best options. There are a lot of people who want to run in 2020. There are candidates, there are governors, senators, celebrities, former vice presidents, former presidential candidates, all these people who want to run. It's going to be a big field. And one of the biggest questions coming out of the midterms is this idea of, do they need a populist and progressive, very progressive candidate who, appeals to very far left, but may, on the other hand, dissatisfy a lot of centrist voters. And that's a big question coming into 2020, and this idea of to be or not to be progressive or not. And they now can, because of the midterms, can look at certain candidates and say, was this successful or not? And so, in Florida, the gubernatorial candidate, Andrew Gillum, was very, very, very liberal. And therefore, he was really not able to win some voters, especially in South Florida, because, his sort of almost socialist policies worried a lot of people in South Florida, who had escaped socialist countries, Cuba, those sort of places, and who were worried, about this very liberal candidate. And so some people feel, should there be more of a centrist candidate? And they look to a place like Arizona, where Kyrsten Sinema won a seat in what has, been really a solidly red state for a very long time. And she won partially because she was very, very, very centrist. And she appealed to a lot of these sort of swing voters, a lot of these, suburban women who are really a group that Democrats need in order to win back the presidency in 2020. But then others do point to someone like a Beto O'Rourke, who did very well in Texas, running on a very liberal policy. And so, some wonder if, they should go in more of, a Sinema type direction where, you may get centrist, but you also may not have a lot of, passion amongst very liberal people, which is kind of what happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton and some of the Bernie supporters. Or do you support more of a liberal candidate like a Beto O'Rourke, who may do very well, but also could be like a Gillum, where it's just too liberal for the country and dissatisfies a lot of voters? And that's a really big question going into 2020. Now, when you look at the map for 2020, there are a bunch of states that are really the states that will decide the election. States like Florida, Ohio, Nevada, Colorado, Virginia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, New Hampshire. These are all states with a lot of these sort of swing voters. And these are states that are, not really solidly red or not really solidly blue. And so these states really dictate how the party goes about, both, deciding a nominee for the Democrats, while sort of deciding, what issues do they focus on. In states, like Florida or like, Ohio or the Rust Belt, is it better to have someone who is, an unabashed progressive, or do you want someone who is really more of a centrist? And, over the next few weeks, when I go through some of these candidates, I'm going to kind of talk about that and talk about, who has strength in certain states, which states, may want a very liberal candidate, while other states may want someone who's more sort of down the middle. And that's something that's going to be really interesting. And so again, whoever the candidate is, whoever, primary voters pick, they will then have to go up against President Trump, who has both a lot of strengths and a lot of weaknesses. For him, the economy is doing very well. And some people have said, he's brought back order and safety, while others say, he has really promoted a sense of intolerance. He's been sort of incompetent. He has, really promoted a overwhelming sort of divide within the country. And so it'll be very interesting to see, how the fact that they are running against Donald Trump really impacts the way in which the parties focus on their issues. Now, for the Republicans, they really want to focus on the economy. That was something that they really wanted to focus on. And a lot of Republicans were actually very upset with President Trump because he really focused on this immigration and the caravan in advance of the midterms, when they said he really should have focused on the economy, on the Supreme Court, on things like that. On the flip side, Democrats, they really did well running on issues like healthcare and on issues that they kind of call, kitchen table issues, like issues that really matter to Americans, such as healthcare and benefits and things like that. And so it'll be interesting to sort of see, do the Democrats sort of focus more on those issues, or do they focus more on sort of some of these issues which are a bit more sort of, their issues such as, LGBTQ rights or abortion or things like that, which are sort of their issues that are very divisive for people and that are kind of these more social issues? Or do Democrats focus more on things like healthcare and things like, Social Security reform? And so it'll be very interesting to see, what issues matter to candidates. And that's why I'm doing this series where I'm really going to focus on how the parties will move ahead and how they will sort of, especially for the Democrats, pick a candidate and then therefore, base the issues and, and whether or not I think that may work for 2020. And so, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So hopefully you will come along for the next few weeks through some articles, some podcasts, and just a general sort of rundown of what I think might happen, some of the biggest candidates, the biggest issues, sort of how this extremely influential election season that is about to begin may progress.